So in this Python tutorial, I'm going to show you how to build your very own image editing app, just like building your own Photoshop, maybe slightly simpler, but in the same neighborhood. And we're going to do this using Tkinter, the interface to build a GUI, and Pillow, which is a Python library for image manipulation. So what I love about this project is it's building something genuinely practical. I think one of the great things about building projects like this is that you're showing your skills to prospective employers and other people in a way where you can build something that the world actually needs, that has some real purpose and utility. So by the end, you'll have a working app that'll let you load an image and apply filters, whether that's blur or sharpen or other things. And you can save your edits, revert them, whatever you like. It's going to be a fairly simple, but also powerful app that is going to require you to use some really cool skills, including some object-oriented programming. So we're going to be using OOP to build this. So let's dive in and build this app together right now. So to build this app, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code or VS Code. I've got a brand new blank Python file called imageeditor.py, and I'm going to be coding this in real time with you. Now, obviously, before we get started, we need to also ensure that we've got all of our libraries installed. So what you need to do is we're going to be using Pillow. That is something that doesn't come by default with Python. So if you don't have this installed already, you would just simply head on over to your terminal and run this command, pip install Pillow, and this would set you up. I've already got it installed, so it's satisfied the requirements already. But if you don't have it, run this command, hit enter, wait for it to install, and you'll be set. Okay, so I must mention that you can't build this without having Pillow installed. All right, so assuming you've got that ready, knowing then that Pillow is a really fantastic tool because it's an advanced library for image manipulation in Python, you'll be ready to get stuck in because Tkinter is included with Python. So you don't need to install it separately. Let's begin by doing what we'd always do at the start. We're going to make our imports. We need to import some libraries. I've just mentioned Tkinter, so obviously I'm going to import Tkinter. I'm going to set it as TK. That's fairly standard practice. And then from Tkinter, I am going to import the following file dialog, which we're going to need to be able to allow users, of course, to select an image. So how are they going to navigate through their directories to find an image? They need a file dialog. And then we're going to use message box as well. Okay, and then from Pill, which is Pillow, we're going to import the following. We're going to import image. We're going to import image TK. We're going to import image filter naturally, because we're going to be applying filters to our images. And that's how we're going to essentially apply image effect to images within our own app. So Tkinter will be used to create a GUI, and we're using the Pillow modules to help image processing and displaying images in the app. Okay, excellent. So now let's move on to the meat of this project. So we're going to be using OOP, which is object-oriented programming, which means we need to create a class. And we're going to create a class and the init method. Okay, so obviously every class needs an init method. Now, if you're new to object-oriented programming in Python, this would be a great introduction for you. I'm not going to go into all the details today, so just follow along. But in essence, by using OOP, we can group related code into a single reusable structure, which is obviously one of the reasons why you would use object-oriented programming in the first place. So we can follow the principles and we can get stuck in and create our own class called image editor app. And we're then going to define our init method. And you'll notice this is a dunder or double underscore method. This is a special method in Python, and it is used to initialize the attributes of our class. And we're going to be using the self parameter within this, which refers to the current instance of the class that allows us to access attributes and methods within the class. Again, all fairly standard if you're familiar with object-oriented programming. If you're new to it, maybe it's not so familiar, but you should be able to figure out what's going on by following along with me. And we're going to initialize attributes for our application window and images. So let's do this now. We're going to define it. So we need the class keyword. We're going to call this image editor app, definition of our class. And notice that obviously with classes, you always use uppercase when you start a class compared to, say, standard function, which would be lowercase. Notice it's got uppercase I. That is standard behavior for defining a class. Now we need to define our init method. As I mentioned, double underscore or a dunder always has self, and we're going to pass in a parameter of root. So self is always included. You would always add self. That is essential, but we're also adding an extra parameter. So if someone instantiates a new version of our class, they'll have to pass in a root, which is going to be a Tkinter root window. Okay, so then we've got that. We're going to say self.root is equal to root. Okay, and then we're going to say self.root.title is going to be the following. We're going to call it image editing app. So this is essentially me foreshadowing the fact I'm using Tkinter for this. I know that a root.title attribute is available, and I'm passing in a Tkinter object, which is why I have the title available to access here and to assign. Of course, if I didn't pass in that, this would fail spectacularly. So it's essential that when someone instantiates a version of this, that they are passing in a root Tkinter object. Okay, so self.root, I'm going to say geometry, which is the size. I'm going to set this to 1000 by 600, and then I'm going to use the figure method, and I'm going to say the background is going to be equal to, what should I go with? I'm going to go with int. All right, then. So that is the first thing that I'm doing. I'm passing in root and then assigning it to self, the self.root object, which I'm instantiating here. I'm setting this within here. These are the attributes for the class, and then I'm just setting these other aspects of it as well. Okay, so now let's add some more elements to this. Okay, so I'm going to initialize attributes for the image. I've done the window, which is this. Now I need to initialize attributes for the image. Okay, you can say self.array is going to be initially equal to none. Here, the none object. And then this is going to be how we're going to store the original image. So if someone makes changes to this, we want to revert back. We've obviously got to get that image back. Okay, then we're going to say self.image is equal to none. And this is going to be where we store the editable copy. And then we're going to say self image tk is also equal to none. And oh, what have we got here? I should have added this to a new line. There we go. And this is where we are going to display images in Tkinter. All right. So we've now set up our init method that is essential for our class. We've used it to initialize our attributes. We can now move on to adding methods for functionality. So what do we think we need for functionality within our class? Well, we need to be able to load an image and display an image. So let's create functions or methods to load an image and display an image. So we'll start with load image. Obviously, with this being a method within a class, it needs to have self passed in. So I'm going to just do pass to begin with. And then we'll also have display image. Again, passing in self and pass. So obviously, if you're familiar with Python, you need to pass in pass. You want to be able to run this code without it throwing any errors, because that's telling them to basically ignore it for the time being. So I'm going to start now with the load image method. So what do we want to do? We want to allow users to load any image they like and then be able to apply effects to it. So we need to be able to ask them to essentially load their image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file path variable. I'm going to use file dialog, which I used here. Okay. So essentially the file dialog from Tkinter lets the user select an image file. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to call the ask open file name method. I'm going to basically specify the image file types I would expect, which is going to be JPEGs, PNGs, bitmaps, GIFs, etc. And then what we're going to do is we're going to check whether the file path exists. If it does exist, we can then essentially load the image by using the image open method, and we can assign that to our self original image attribute. And we can also then put a copy of that and put it into the self image attribute, because in essence, we want to have the original kept and we want a copy that the user can work on. I'm going to code all this out now, and it'll make all more sense once I do that. So I've got my file path variable. I'm going to use file dialog. I'm going to use the ask open file name method. I'm going to set my file types equal to the following. So I need a list, and then within that, I'm going to put in a tuple. So I've got my list, and then within that, my tuple, and I'm going to say the following. So image files, and then I'm going to have the following, which is going to be, so I want to work with JPEGs, PNGs, bitmaps, and I guess GIFs for this. I think that's a reasonable covering of the image files that you'd expect. So I'm going to say this. I want to have, using the wildcard there, or JPG or JPEG, because obviously JPEGs can be two types, right? And then we've got all PNG, then we've got all .bmp for bitmaps, then we've got all .gifs or GIFs, depending on how you like to pronounce it. Let's not get into that right now. And that is going to cover all of the file types that we want to allow users to open. Because obviously we want to work on images only. You don't want to let them load a Word document or a spreadsheet or a CSV file. Okay. So now, assuming the file path exists, we then want to do something, and that is assigning things to our object attributes. So we're going to say self, I'm going to say original image. It's going to be equal to, I'm using then the image from Pillow, and then using that import along with the open method to open the file path. So I'm creating an image essentially by using the image object class from Pillow and then opening that using the file path that the user has provided to me. And that's using this file dialog box. They would have provided the file dialog box GUI. They would have access to that. They would choose the image that they want. That would give us a path which we can then use to pass in here and create an image and then assign it to our attribute. So once we've got that, what we then need to do is we need to also set the self.image, and we're going to make this equal to self.original image. We're going to make it a copy of that. So we're making a copy that we can edit, and we've also got a copy that we want to leave the original. Okay. And then finally, we're going to call the display image function, which is down here. As you can see, we haven't actually defined that yet. I'm going to call it within load image. So load image is going to use display image. Okay, great. So I'm going to click save just to save our progress. Adds a bit of formatting, so I've got Prettier installed. And now this is obviously Pepe formatting as well, just in case you're interested. Now it's time to define the display image function. This is how we're going to display the image, right? This is going to resize the image while essentially preserving the aspect ratio. This is something that I'm adding. So I want to make sure that if someone adds an image, whatever the aspect ratio is, we're always preserving that. Then we're going to prepare it for display in the app. So what do we need to do? Well, first of all, we need to make sure that there is an image, right? Because if it's set to none, this is not going to work. So we use if self.image. If it exists, let's do something. If not, we do nothing. Now, bearing in mind, again, originally it is set to none. If this is still none, this is going to return false, so we're not going to enter this block. If, however, we have assigned an image using this part here, then we can enter into this block. All right, so what do we want to do? Well, we want to work on the aspect ratio. We're going to create a variable called aspect ratio, okay? And this aspect ratio is going to be equal to self.image.width. So we can get this because it's an attribute from the image object that we've got from Pillow. And we're going to divide that by self.image.height, if I can spell height correctly. Okay, so that's fairly standard. I think we all understand what aspect ratio is and what that means. So I'm essentially finding out the aspect ratio and I'm assigning that to a variable. Then let's say we want a standard width of 600 because we've only got a finite space to fit it in because we've created this here, right? So let's say the standard width is going to be 600. So we're going to call new width equal to 600. And now we need to work out the new height. And we can simply do that by using the aspect ratio, dividing the width by the aspect ratio, converting that to an integer, and we will have the new height. And that will give us a very good approximation of the height we need to maintain aspect ratio. So we can use the integer, or rather the int class or the int method. So we're going to create a new instance of an int. And we're going to pass in the new width, and we're going to say divide that by the aspect ratio. And what this means, we've now got a height that matches up properly with the aspect ratio with our 600 width. Then it will fit nicely within our app. And then we want to assign the image TK attribute. We're going to use the image TK class. So the image TK class, and we are going to use a photo image. And we're going to say the following. I want to use self.image. And I also want to resize this. And what am I going to resize it to? Well, naturally, I'm going to resize it to the new width and the new height, right? Because that's what I want to use. So I need to pass in the following. So I'm going to pass in this. I'm then going to add a tuple here because I also want to add an effect to that to make sure it goes in properly. So new width, if I could, new width, new height. Great. And then I want to use image. And we're going to have this effect here. Great. Okay, lovely. To our image TK attribute, which is what we are, of course, using to display the image within our app. And then we're going to set this to self image label .config. And we're going to say image is equal to self.image TK. Okay, so the eagle-eyed among you will notice that we've added this image label. Now, notice I haven't actually added it here in the initiation or rather the initialization method within the class, which means that at some point we obviously can do something with this, right? So the essential point is that with the display image function, we can be able to resize the image, preserve the aspect ratio, and then display it in the app by preparing it properly. Okay, so what do we need to do next? Well, a big part of this project is that we want to be able to apply filters. So let's add a method that will apply filters, whether that's blur, sharpen, or others to the image. And this is going to be a nice way to do this because we're going to wrap it in a nice, neat method. And we're going to call this apply. So you're going to pass in self, but also going to pass in the filter type. So which means we've got to create this somewhere later, which we'll get to in a moment. So, okay. So if we have an image, again, obviously we need an image. If it isn't there, this is going to be none and it will just exit. We're going to say self image or self image filter. We're going to apply it a filter type really neatly like that. And then we're going to call our display image method. Great. So all we're doing here is saying, do we have an image? Yes. If so, let's apply the filter based upon the filter type that is passed in here. And of course, we're going to have to do something to send that in later. So what's cool about this is this method is using Pillow's built-in filter function to apply the filter to the image. It's really simple. All we need to do is pass the filter type as an argument when this method is called. So you can see how OOP really neatly encapsulates this. Rather than having everything messily laid out by using object-oriented programming, we're keeping things really neat and really reusable. So All right, we've created that method. We need to add some more functionality. We need to add the option to reset the image. So imagine we've made a bunch of changes. We want to go back to the original one, and also to save the image. So we've made changes and we want to preserve these and persist these for later. So let's now leave what we have here. Okay, and the next bit is to create two new methods. We've got reset image. Again, self. We'll just this is passed for the time being. Something funny is going on here. So let's just make sure this is out. Okay, so reset image, and then we'll actually let's just flesh this out, and I'll do the next one in a moment. So we're going to say if self original image. So we have an original image, of course. We need to make sure we've got one. We should have one. If we've got any image, we should have an original, because of course the image assigned to the attribute is a copy of the original. We're just going to say the following: self.image equal to a new copy of the original image. So we're basically just creating another copy of our original, assigning it to self, and we're kind of resetting back to where we were to begin with. And then we will display image. So hopefully you can follow that logic. If you remember back in the init function, we said the original is none and the image is none. But when we load an image over here, we said we're going to make the original image equal to the image that we open. We're then going to create a copy of that and assign it to the image attribute, right? Now, down here, when we reset image, what are we doing? Well, we're saying the following. We're saying, hey, if we've got an original image, let's get that, create a new copy and assign it back to the image attribute, essentially removing and wiping the edited version and putting it back to the original. That's fairly logical. I hope you can follow along with that logic. And now let's create our save image method. So within this, again, if self image, we need to make sure we've actually got that. So just going to save this for a sec. This formatter is being a bit funny. There we go. That fixes that. So if we have an image, of course, we need an image. We can't save it unless there is one that exists. Let's now save it. So we're going to use the file dialog again, and we're going to create a file path. And we're going to say file dialog. We're going to say ask, and we're going to say ask save as file name. And then we're going to pass in the following. So we're going to say the default extension is going to be, call it a PNG. Okay, got PNG. And then let's set our file types. So what do we want for file types? Well, we've got PNGs, JPEGs, or all files. I think that makes sense. I think that's a reasonable way to do it. I think that's really just like the normal saving window. So if we go with the file types, we are then going to have to create a list, and within that, we can have various tuples. So to begin with, we have got the following tuple. I think we'll go with 3, so I'm just going to create those in advance. So the first one is going to be PNG files, and then of course that is going to be PNG. Next up, let's go with JPEG files, and then for that, of course, we will go with JPG. Great. And then I think the last one, I think we'll just go with all files. I think that makes the most sense. So we'll just go with all files. And then in terms of type, we'll simply say, great. Okay. Excellent. So we have done that. We've got our default extension. We've got our file types list. Everything looks set in there. Lovely. So now what we need to do is we need to do like we did over here. Remember we used our dialog box. We need to check the file path exists. If it does exist, then we'll do something. If not, we obviously exit. So let's go down here. So we've checked there's an image. Excellent. We've got our file path. Excellent. Now we're going to say if file path, do something. And that's going to be saving the image. So we're going to say self.image, and we're going to pass in the file path as the path to save it to. Then we're going to use a message box, and we're going to say the following. We're going to use show info method, and we're going to say success and the following message. Image saved successfully. Huzzah. Great. All right. So hopefully you can follow along with that. What we're doing is the following. With save image, we can let users save the edits to file using Tkinter's file dialog to save a location by selecting it. And if they have selected location, then great. If they haven't, then there's of course going to be an error. So that should handle that. Let's save this. Something is awry there, which I'll fix in a moment. So let's see what's going on here. Great. So yeah, we are obviously giving users the option to reset the image with the reset image method, and we've obviously got the option to save the image with the save image method. So like always, we're checking if an image is assigned to the attribute. If it is, we're then going to do something. And in this case, we're going to use the file dialog, and we're going to use them to save as when you're given the option for JPEGs, PNGs, or all files. And assuming there's an valid file path, we will then save that file. Great. So we're getting on really well here. So the final stage really is that we need to create our user interface. We need to add a method to create all the buttons and labels for the app's interface. So we've got all these different methods at the moment, of course. So the next method we're going to want is going to be called create widgets, and obviously self, as always. So there is something very strange going on with my formatter, so please bear with me. Okay. So within this, we're basically going to create a display. We're going to have a filter section, a load image button, a whole bunch of different things are going to happen in this section. So let's just start building this out now. And what you'd expect is that this is going to create buttons for loading images, applying filters, resetting, and saving the image. So everything that you've seen us create methods for so far, this is going to be the GUI element that's going to allow us to do this. All right. So I'm just going to fly through this, type it all out. If you're new to Tkinter, some of this might be confusing to you, but in essence, if you imagine, I'm just basically creating buttons, creating labels. I'm adding some padding to those. I'm creating a section to apply different filters. And in essence, it will kind of seem fairly logical once you see the code come to light. So if you're not familiar with Tkinter, though, I highly encourage you to read the documentation because that will help you get really comfortable with how to use it. Let's create a load button, call this a TK button, and then we're going to obviously assign this to self.root. So remember, I created this root object at the top here. Remember, I passed in root when I create an instance of the class and I assign it to the root. Now I'm essentially accessing that, which is meaning I'm accessing the Tkinter root object within here and then assigning buttons to that. So that will hopefully make some sense as the OOP effect. You weren't using OOP, you do this all in line somewhere else. But what's going to happen is that when we get to the end of the code, I'm going to create a Tkinter object, pass that in as a variable or as a parameter to creating my instance of this image editor app class. And then that Tkinter is going to be available throughout. And I'm going to use it specifically in this create widgets method where I'm going to be assigning all of these different buttons and labels, etc. So hopefully that will make sense as we go through. So I need to assign some text to this. So we're going to say load image even. And then we're going to assign a command, of course, because this is going to be doing something. So the command is going to be self.load image. So that's the function that we want to use. We could then set a background. So let's say the background is going to be equal to the following. So we'll say F. We could then set the foreground and we can make that white. Nice and simple. And then we can assign a font. So we could say, how about we go with Arial, fairly simple font, and maybe a size of 12. And then let's pad X and pad Y. So we're going to pad X by 10 and pad Y by 5. Okay, great. And that should handle that. Okay, so then what we want to do is we want to pack this again. So we're going to say self.load button, we can pack it and add padding by Y. Oh, great stuff. Okay, so that is our load image button. Now we need to have an area to display the image when someone loads an image. So it's just an image display area where you will see the image you want to work on. So we're going to create an image label. Okay, so image label. So if you remember up here, I used image label in display image. So now here's where I am creating that. Okay, perfect. I'm going to create that image label there, and that is going to work beautifully. So let's just ensure everything is going the way that we would want. So one thing I would point out is that when we do finish this, one thing that we have to do that is essential. So we have to come back up to our initiation or initialization class, and we're going to have to add the following. We're going to have to add this self.create. We need to ensure that we call this function at least once to ensure that we are, of course, creating the app. Okay, so that's what we're doing here. So we're creating it down here. But in order to make sure that the app GUI is instantiated, we've got to call this method. So we'll call it in there. So I've added that right now. You could do it at the end if you like. But I thought I'd just point that out now because it's important to remember. So we've got our image label. So we're going to create a tk.label. We are going to say self.root, of course. And then we're going to give it a background of following the E6. Great. Let's save this for a moment to make sure everything is working great. Cool. All right. So we obviously want to pack this as well. So self image label pack. We're going to do pad Y, I think 10. Keep it nice and neat. Now we need to work on our filter section. So if you think about it, we're going to allow the user to apply a bunch of different filters, and we're going to pass those into our apply filter method here. So what do we need to do? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to organize this with a frame. This is going to be a little section where we're then going to put a bunch of different buttons. So let's create our frame. So I'm going to call this filters frame, and I'm going to make this a tk.frame. And then I'm obviously going to use self.root because this is where we're assigning all of this to. And let's give it a background that I think is going to be equal to what we've used here. I think that makes a lot of sense. So apply that background, great. And then we're going to add this, add pad y of 20, great. So we've got a filters frame. That's looking good. So what's next? So I talked about filters and we can be passing those in. Well, what's the easiest way to do this? Well, I think we can create a list of all the different filters we're going to use. Remember, I did an import of image filter. We're going to use this class and we're going to basically assign a bunch of the different filters available to a list of tuples, and we're going to pass those in when we are essentially applying the effect. So let's create our filters list. Within that, we can have a range of tuples, and each tuple is going to be the following. So it could be blur is the name, and then we want image filter dot blur. Okay, so that is how we are going to create this list. So I'm going to do a bunch of these. I'm not going to speak them all out. We're going to have blur, contour, edge enhance, emboss, sharpen, and smooth. And it's going to look the same for each one. So what I could do if I wanted to be quick is I could essentially copy a bunch of those and then just edit them all as I go. So I've got blur, contour, edge enhance, emboss, sharpen, and smooth. 1, 2, 3, 6. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that looks as though we put the right number. So I want blur, I want contour, and that's going to be contour. I want edge enhance, so we're going to call that edge enhance. I want emboss. Okay, I think you can get the idea of what's going on here. We also want sharpen and then smooth. Great. Okay, so we've got our list. This has got all of our setup ready to apply these filters. But what we need to do now, we need to create a range of buttons. These are buttons that are going to be in our app, and when the user clicks on the button, it's going to apply a filter. So we're going to basically use a for loop, create a range of buttons. Each of those buttons, we are going to assign a command, and that command is just going to be this method here to apply filter. And within that, we're going to pass in, of course, the filter we want to use. So I'm going to use some Lambda functions for this to keep it nice and tidy and Pythonic. Let's create this for loop now. So turn caps off. So for filter name and filter, just add underscore there. So of course I want to iterate over the filters list. And bear in mind, this is a list and each item is a tuple, and each tuple has 2 elements, which is why I've got filter name and filter type, extracting each from each element in the list. Okay, and then what am I going to do? I'm going to create a TK button. I'm going to say TK button, and then going to apply following. So I'm going to put this in the filters frame. So I want to put all the buttons there. I'm going to say the text is equal to the filter name. That makes sense because obviously I want the text to align it with what I've got here. And then command is going to be equal to what? It's going to be equal to lambda. Okay. And here's how I'm going to apply the lambda. So I've got lambda, then I'm going to say ft equals filter type. Okay. And then I'm going to say self.apply filter. And then obviously what do I want to pass in? I want to pass in ft. All right. Does that make sense? So if ft is this variable and it's the filter type, which we have got here, I want to use that in my lambda. I'm going to use it with my apply filter method and pass it in as the parameter, or rather the argument. And what that means is I'm going to pass in the filter type that's then going to be used to apply here. Does that make sense? I hope so. So that's a nice Pythonic way to do that, I think. Really cool. Okay, so let's add some styling now to our button. So we've got our lambda function. Great. Let's add a background. I think we can make that the same as we used over here. So I think what we could do is we could copy all of this. I think if we go with all of that, copy that, drop it in here as well. And I think rather than a size of 12, we'll go with a size of 10. I think padding 10 and 5 looks good too. And there we go. And then once we've done, we can actually apply the pack method to this. And what we're going to say is pack it with a side of left. And then we're going to add x equals 10 and pad y equals 5. save that, and should be great. So something strange is happening here. So we're just going to see what we can do to fix this. So inside, we need to obviously indent one more. Something odd is going on. There we go, fix that. My formatter is going wild today, so I'm going to have to check into this later. Okay, so we are iterating over our filters list. We are creating new buttons for every filter using the filter name as the label. And we are using the filter here, using the image filter class. And we are passing that into a Lambda function, which in turn calls our apply filter method, passing that in as the argument. So a lot going on there, but hopefully you can see it's a really efficient way to create all of those effects. All right, what have we got to do? We need some reset and save buttons. And then I think we are going to be closer to ready. So let's say we're going to create another frame. It's a nice way to organize our buttons. So we'll call this frame. And we're going to use self.root again. And then in terms of the background, I think we're just going to copy this rather than typing it out. Keeps it nice and quick. Great. Okay, so that is our buttons frame to contain all of the buttons that I am about to create. And we don't want that in our for loop, of course. So let's make sure that isn't indented. And then we want to pack this as well. So self buttons frame, we're going to pack it and we're going to add pad Y of 20. Great. Now let's create a reset button. Okay. And this is obviously going to be a TK button. And what do we want? Well, we want to give it bunch of different parameters. So I'm thinking we will obviously assign this the buttons frame. And what else we need to do? We need to give it some text. So we're going to call it reset image. Make sure that's spelled properly. Great, reset image. Obviously it needs a command. So the command is going to be self.reset, because this is the reset image. Remember, we used this over here. We've got our reset method here. So we're now applying this as the command that is ran by this button. Great. And then we need to apply some background, foreground, font, padding, etc. So I think for speed, I'm going to quickly copy this and then we can just make some changes on the fly. I think for the background, we'll go with a different color. We'll go with 2.8 and then a 7.5. And then foreground white, I think that's fine. Arial, we'll make the size 12 and then padding 10 and 5 looks good as well. So then what we can do is pack this and then we're gonna add what I think we say side equals left again and then add x equals 10. Great. Save this just to make sure everything's looking great. And then in essence, we want kind of the same thing for our save button. So what I think would be really quick to do is we're going to copy all of this, paste it. We're going to call this save button. Save button. Obviously, going to change to command save image because we're doing saving here. Great. We want to change this to save image. And I think all we need to do really then is to change maybe the color. I think just to make it a bit easier to distinguish between the two. So wouldn't we go with the following? We'll change this and we'll make it 17. Okay, save that. Fantastic. Excellent. So we packed it as well. Everything's the same. Excellent. We have now created our create widgets method. And this is what is going to essentially create the GUI whenever you instantiate a new instance of this class. Brilliant. Okay, so we're getting close. So I think the final step is that we just need to be able to run this app. And how do we do that? Well, let's get out of our class altogether and we'll just use an if name equals main block. Fairly standard practice in Python. You should be familiar with this, I hope. And then we're going to create our root object, tk.tk. I mentioned that we need to create that. We're going to create our app, which is going to be our image editor app. And what do we need to pass in? The root as the thing. So remember in the initialization method, we passed in a parameter for root. So there you go. You see it all tying together. We've created our main window. We passed that in as a parameter to the class. And then we can simply run this and everything is good to go. So that actually is it. This allows us to run our app. This creates a Tkinter root window, pass it to our app, and the main loop function keeps the app running while the user closes it, or rather until the user closes it. So the only bit left is to be able to run this code. So we can head on over to our Python terminal and we could run image editor and we would then be able to see whether or not we can work on an image. So how about we run this now and see if everything works as we'd expect. See if we can then work on an image. So here you go. Our app has loaded up just fine. And you should be able to see everything we've built. We've got our load image button, our effect buttons, our reset and save button. So let's load an image now. I am going to load an image. So notice here I have an image ready to go. If I click on this, it is a snake. Lovely. So what can I do with this snake? Well, I can do a bunch of different things. I could add blur, contour, edge enhance, emboss, sharpen, smooth, etc. And if I need to see my buttons, I'll just expand the size of the window for a moment. How about we add some blur? Notice how the snake is getting blurrier and blurrier. If I want to reset, I'm back to the original snake. If I want to contour, I can add more contouring. Again, reset, edge enhance. I hope you can see what is going on here. Sharpening and smoothing, and then maybe blurring as well. So in essence, you can do whatever you like. You can apply all of these, and if you want to change mine, you can reset by clicking reset. And now if I wanted to blur this and then save it, I could then save it, and I could simply click as blurry snake, and I could save it as a PNG, click save, image saved successfully, there we go. And I could reset this and go back to the beginning, or if I wanted, I could now load my blurry snake, and there you see. So that is an image editing app in the flesh and working. So congratulations, I hope you followed along just fine. You have now built an image editing app with Python, which is very cool indeed. You can load images, you can apply filters, save your edits. I would also encourage you to try adding new filters, enhancing the app's design for more functionality, really working on the UX and UI. Maybe you want to build your own fully fledged version of Photoshop. Dig into the Pillow documentation, who knows what's possible. But hopefully what I hope you have learned from this project is that whilst it was slightly time intensive and it took a lot, and you used object-oriented programming as well, so that you were able to build something practically useful, something with real utility, which I think is a great addition to your portfolio, because you can show prospective employers or anybody else out there that you can build things that really help people do things that matter and that are needed. I mean, people are using image editing apps every day. You've now shown that you can build your own. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed building this project with me, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.